So let's take some questions from the audience. See the mics there at the table. And sorry, just on the floor there.
Good question, by the way, Earl.
Oh,
thank you so very much.
All right.
Yeah. I always love innovation centers. You can go to the best university and say, it's time for questions. And all of a sudden, there's dead silence. You go to Innovation Center, people are popping right up. They know that they're cool.
This gentleman over here, could you just say your name and say a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So my name is Dan. I went to business school. I currently work in advertising, but I'm also a very avid fan of technology. Thank you for coming. I'm sure by this point in your life, you've heard every single Steve Jobs question imaginable. I just wanted to ask, since writing the book, is there anything that surprised you that you might have missed in writing the book? And then a follow-up question. There was a section of the book where you talk about, there was a moment when Steve Jobs had rethought about this whole idea of the intersection of technologies and the humanities and talked more about how the future is really about biotechnology and such. Have you given that insight any more thought?
Yeah. There's not anything feel that I've now learned about Steve that I wish were in the book. Many times people come up to me and they start by saying, I knew Steve Jobs and I want to tell you. And I think, oh my God, he's going to say, because I portray him as being a somewhat tough character and hard to deal with, but also a genius who then inspires people. And every single story I get was, he was a total jerk to me, he blew me off. He was, to use a technical term they use in Silicon Valley, an asshole. And then they often say something about him being brilliant. So, there's that. There are things I put in that I might have left out that might have been slightly painful to people. There were things I left out because I thought they were just too personally painful. And as a biographer, at a certain point, you have to say, how enlightening is that for the reader versus how painful would that be, like to a family member or a friend or somebody he worked with? So I left some things out. In retrospect, there's probably 5 sentences or 6 I would have left out because I now feel Canadian. I just said out. I've got to go back to being in Louisiana. Because I know that they cause people pain. There were things I couldn't get him to talk about enough. I mean, I got him to talk about personal things up the kazoo. He didn't like talking about software design. He just was not a software designer, not a coder. So you talk about hardware design, you try to get him on the Darwin kernel and the next operating system and how that translated to the iOS. And his eyes would glaze over. So I regret, but I'm not sure he really cared about the design of software as much as he should have. On biotech, I think there are a couple of new things, the next phases of the revolution. One, as I said many times in this talk, is connecting the creative industries to technology. The other is saying that innovation isn't just about infotech. It isn't just digital. It's easier to do, if I may say, infotech, information technology, innovation. It can be done in a garage. It can be done with a group of friends. Doing bigger things like Elon Musk is doing with a car, that involves regulation. It involves big, you need, if you're going to build batteries in cars, it's different from doing Facebook in your dorm room with friends. And the second, of course, is biotech. Biotech is the next great frontier, and it will be a different type of innovative frontier. Toronto will be in the center of it because you need great medical research institutions. Boston, Toronto, unlike Silicon Valley, having that concentration. You will not be able to do it quite as much in your dorm room. And it will take a different type of venture capital. It's not like, let's give you $100,000. If you fail, so what? And if you succeed, I own 1% of Facebook and I have $1 billion. It'll be a more capital-intensive thing. But it's actually more important in a way. I don't want to minimize the current phase of the digital revolution, but apps that allow you to rate beers in a bar are not as socially useful as the people at the Broad Institute who are sequencing the genome of viruses, re-engineering it, and will be there the next time we get hit with Ebola.
Let's deal with this question over here.
Yes. So my name is Hamid. I am a co-founder and CEO of Recreate Robotics.
I'm sorry, say that one more time.
I'm a CEO and co-founder of Recreate Robotics. And I enjoy your book. It was very enjoyable to read. And in your book, you touch on, you discuss artificial intelligence, you discuss electronics and computing. So I wanted to ask you about your thoughts on robotics and how the industry you think will evolve. And what do you think would there be need, what do you think would there is the need that the industry do to actually make it an industry like computing? And a second question, do you have any plans, is there any plan for like translating the book into other languages so other people
Well, the easiest one is the second. I think Steve Jobs went into 140 languages, which may have set a record. There are like 17 languages in India alone. This book has been, I think there's 20 languages. I already have the Arabic and the Spanish editions. On robotics, it sort of ties into what I was saying about artificial intelligence, which is we can try to create machines that mimic the human mind or ones that, as Doug Engelbart would say, augment, complement, as Peter Thiel calls it, complementarity. Partnership and symbiosis, the words that Ada Lovelace and Licklider use. I've often felt that the robotics industry was focused too much on trying to replicate humans rather than partner with humans. A robotics industry that does things like in manufacturing and builds things and stuff is great. But I go to, say, Applied Minds, and they're so proud of their robots, and they'll show me a robot that can sort of, you know, almost act like a human. And yet, it still can't walk across a room that's an unfamiliar room, pick up a crayon, and write its name. Just like I said about Google, that's something a 4-year-old can do. So why try to make the robot do in circuitry what we do in analog wetware in our brain? Why not say, let's make it more of the combination, which is, now you can correct me because you're in the field, where the greatest advances seem to have been is in robotics that work with humans instead of try to totally replace them.
I have to say from the stage, I have a bit of a vantage point. And I'm just saying, but this lineup of questionnaires
we're talking
is
about women getting into technology.
Awash in testosterone here.
Yeah. Another reason women don't do well in technology, I hate to say, is Madeleine Albright used to say, women have to learn how to be the first to ask questions and the first to interrupt. So with that, maybe we'll
just leave it at that. Sir.
All right, I'll change the topic then. My name's Peter. I work for a city government. And I have on my floor a number of engineers with public school-aged daughters who definitely have the aptitude for mathematics and engineering, but as you said, not enough role models. I'd love to recommend your book, but if Ada Lovelace of the 19th century and the ENIAC 6 of the 1940s are the only real role models,
and Grace, yeah,
would you consider doing a sequel to the book in terms of bringing the women up to date in terms of the innovators that are there
Actually, I'm trying to get my daughter to write some of this too and whatever. I think that there are women role models who aren't things yet for me to do biographies on, like Sheryl Sandberg. But they've written really, really good books, like Lean In. Likewise, Marissa Mayer is a great role model. Megan Smith, who is the chief technology officer. Kara Swisher, who invented or is running Recode. So these are women, most of whom write very well and should be doing more and being out there more. And if I think we went, I can't distort history. The problem is that after the 1940s, when we entered the 1950s, the number of women who did math declined. And from 1984 to the present, the number of women doing computer science declined. So it's a little hard for me to say, let me find the woman role model who started Google. Now, Susan Wojcicki is in the book, she was at Google. But, you know, I don't want to invent history just to make us feel good. Otherwise, that would diminish the women of ENIAC or Grace Hopper or even the women today by pretending that there are more women around than there are at the moment.
Your question, your name, and a little bit about yourself.
Hi, my name's Stavros. I run a two-person web company. I used to be a journalist. I read the book, and it seems if there's, I don't know, a critique or a discussion to have about it, is that it's very Silicon Valley focused into a, you know, certain extent American focus. Mm-hmm. And now that we do have the internet and the ability, you know, information is diffused, as you discussed, and if you just mentioned right now about, you know, medical clusters and so forth, how do you see that shaping up around, I hate the word innovation, but where things are going to be happening and how that's going to work, as part of the premise of the book is about that idea of collaboration and the importance of it.
Yeah. I do think it's migrating away from Silicon Valley. You already see that. In fact, the traffic out of San Francisco going to work in the valley, that's where the rush hour is, as opposed to going, because people want to live in cities, they want to live in creative places, they want to be in you know, environments like this one, Mars. And Steve Case, you know, was the person who made AOL work, is doing something called The Rise of the Rest, which is about all the cities, you know, Canada and the United States, that aren't Silicon Valley. So I do think with the rise of biotech, with the rise of the creative industry, you'll see the Torontos, the Austins, even the Clevelands becoming innovation centers. Secondly, with biotech, you'll see Cleveland with the Cleveland Clinic, and Boston with the highest concentration of research hospitals, and Toronto being the new centers. The American-centric critique I cop a plea to as being guilty. I tried, just like I tried to find women, I tried to find, you know, the great innovations. Now, obviously, there's a lot of Brits in there, so it's Anglo-American centric, meaning everybody from Alan Turing to Tim Berners-Lee, you know, are very important. But I tried to find the people in China, the people wherever, who were doing the great innovations. And I'm sure they're there, but I looked at the major innovations of our time. I did not pick the people first. I picked the innovations first, meaning the computer, the transistor, the microchip, the internet, you know, search, the web, you know, those, go through them all. And I don't see the pioneers in other places. I think there are a lot of reasons. One question I get, which is the flip of your question, which is why did it seem, I mean, you sort of asked it, why did it seem to happen in the San Francisco Bay Area in the early 70s? I think there are a lot of reasons it happens in, I'll say, Canada and the United States, which is, again, our comfort with the free flow of information, our willingness to have societies that allow you to challenge authority. And maybe at some point, things will arise out of China that aren't mainly copies of things that have already happened, you know, elsewhere. And I'm looking for that, but I don't see it in the information technology space in the past 60 years as much. Germany would have been a place. Germany has the early computers with Hermann Zuse and stuff. The problem is, you know, his place got bombed and his computers all got destroyed by the Allied bombing, and Germany was not in as strong of a position for a while.
Hi, Walter. My name is Ryan Collins, and I actually work here at Mars in a group called Studio Y, which I guess I would describe as a stew of 25 young people from around Ontario. We all come from different backgrounds, like some are artists, I'm an entrepreneur, we have people in biomedicine, biotechnology, engineers, and we try to create change in the world. And I guess my question focuses on how do we create these leaders that you allude to in your book? And my first question would be, you work on a lot of different university boards, college boards, but you mentioned so many people dropping out. So what interventions can universities make to actually create graduates that stick and that are actually being involved in technology? And the second thing would be, you mentioned a lot about intimacy with technology, and then you talk about the stew that Steve Jobs existed in, following his intuition, going to India, working at an apple farm. And for me, I'm challenged to see this a lot in our society today, that we live so dependent and so involved in technology. It's hard for people to sit still and just be comfortable, meditate, sit down. So how do you see universities and different institutions developing people who are proficient in technology, but still have the ability to step away to it and engage in some of the other humanities that are hard to step away from now that we're so intimate with technology?
It's a really good question that we wrestle with at a lot of the universities. And I'll take Stanford and Harvard as slightly differing approaches. Stanford is very successful because it's very utilitarian. It's like, all right, you should be transactional, meaning your studies should be geared to making something. In fact, from the Leland Stanford original, grant to the present, you're supposed to be doing something that will turn into something useful and be transactional. And that's a helpful thing to spur innovation. At Harvard, they're creating both the Innovation Center and the new campuses in Alston that are there to connect with the business school to allow more transactional studies. But there's a part of Harvard, led by the president, Drew Faust, that says, at least as an undergraduate, for your 4 years there, you're supposed to marvel at art. You're supposed to travel to India. You're supposed to not be transactional in your education, but transformative in your education. It's supposed to shape who you are as a human. And it's not there to say, I'm doing this course because I am going to, learn the C++ coding and thus use it for a transactional way. And that's a tension that's interesting. I tend to be a little bit more on the side of we don't need to become more transactional. We should allow colleges to nurture creativity in all of its forms, in beauty, in the arts, and not say this is something practical you're going to learn that you're going to put forth in your profession, but just say maybe Sanskrit poetry will turn you on. Maybe the history of religions, as well as the history of science, as well as, organisms and biology you should learn about. But you should learn about it for the pure joy of learning. And to me, that nurtures curiosity, and curiosity is a prerequisite for creativity. Secondly, I think learning should be more collaborative. When I was in college, they called that cheating, but it means working in teams. So that you can explore together things, usually across silos. Like I noticed that the Kumbh Mela, which Steve Jobs went to in India, which I don't know, you probably know every 20 years or something, one of the grand festivals. Harvard just encouraged whole bunches of students to go there, those studying technology, religion, public health, everything else, and to work as a team when something like that happened. So I don't think there's a recipe, but just like when I said at the very beginning, there's no recipe to innovation where you can say, here's the 7 things you need to learn. Don't worry about learning about people. No, you should actually kind of marvel at Grace Hopper and Bob Noyce and Steve Jobs and say, I'm not just learning 7 transactional lessons. I'm learning about real people, and from them I will get inspired.
Your name and a little bit about yourself.
Hello, so my name is Kairos. I'm very happy that I'm actually asking you a question after reading your book. A little bit about myself, I just changed my name. Kairos means the right time, the timing of opportunity, and I changed it because it sounds like my former name, which was Carlos, and also sounds like curious, so I like that. I once attended a talk by Chris Hughes from the original founders of Facebook, and his talk was the myth of the lonely, all-alone genius. He said it was a complete myth, that it was a very easy explanation to a complicated string of events. Right. And so I would like to get your thoughts and your take, not on a personal story of success or a visible leader, but on a culture of innovation. Over the summer, I went to Israel, which is a very small nation, but also has very remarkable innovation milestones, like flash drives and, I don't know, the startup nation, a lot of companies in NASDAQ are Israeli, even though...
Instant messengers, yeah.
Yeah. The thing that I noticed there was about the culture. Like, I've been living here in Canada for the last 2 years. I've attended meetups for 10, 15 times. Yeah. It was the 5th meetup on the Internet of Things group in Tel Aviv, and they were already pooling their money and setting up a contest to see the next startup.
Let me get back to Chris Hughes and tie the dots together. Because Chris is right. I mean, that's the whole point of this book, which is that innovation is not a loner's sport where somebody in a garret is a romantic lone inventor. That's Isaacson, whose computer never worked. So you have to be collaborative, and you have to form the right teams. Zuckerberg was pretty good at it. He kept Chris Hughes, but but you find cultures that know how to work together. I think that, you may say in Tel Aviv you have that culture. I can see it in many places. But it is, if you're creating Mars here, it is what your main goals should be, which is make it like the homebrew computer club where everybody's sharing diagrams and stuff. They may want to go off on their own with their intellectual property and monetize it at some point, but they're willing to come together and share ideas.
Just one little compliment.
Sure, so we can go here.
Well, we got so many questions.
We do. We have a lot.
Thanks a lot, Walter. So my name is Nitesh Peters. I'm a student entrepreneur, and I do a lot of policy work. So my question is more of a philosophical one. So I really appreciate your emphasis on the creative process and these individuals that develop these technologies. But to what extent do you think, so what I see, I spent a year in West Africa last year working on developing issues. So to what extent do you think technology has become a mechanism that drives itself, to the extent to which, don't you think technology is an instrument for greater social problems, right? So, I mean, I know lots of people in the Valley.
Sorry, for what social problems?
To solve social problems, so to make the world a better place, right? So I know a lot of people in the Valley, in Toronto, in the startup community, and it's almost as if technology as a cycle drives itself rather than starting with the problem, right? Starting with global problems, and they're viewing technology as an instrument. And so philosophically, I feel like your book plays a premium.
It's called the teleological question, which is whether technology has its own personality, whether the printing press automatically pushes you to creation of novels or the Reformation or the Renaissance or whatever. I tend to be on the side that doesn't put a lot of stock on technology having its own, What Technology Wants is a good book by a friend of mine, but I'm not absolutely sure technology wants something. I think it is a tool.
It is a tool.
Yeah, and it is a tool that we get to use. I sometimes think that we want, to create a startup that will go public in 3 years or it'll be bought out in 2 years and make $1 million or $1 billion. So therefore, we create technologies that are not as socially useful as they could be, but are geared to being startups that get to an IPO quickly. So I don't know that we can blame the technology. As Shakespeare would tell us, the fault is in ourselves if that's happening. I tend to think that the profit motive is actually a good spur to allowing Intel to create a microchip, if you know what I mean, and probably a drug company to finally figuring out how to sequence the Ebola virus. So I'm not trying to take the profit motive out, but I'm trying to say you want to create something of value. And there's two ways to defining value. One is a market short-term value, and one is a value to society over a longer term. At the very end of Steve Jobs' life, when he was pretty sick, I remember asking him a question like this, which is, what's the meaning of all this technology we're creating? And he said, life is like a river. If you're lucky, you get to take things out of the river that people before you have invented and put in it. Ideas they've invented, processes, gadgets, whatever. But when you get to a certain point, you realize that the meaning of life is not how much you get to take out of the river, but what you put back into the river. What will be meaningful a generation later. And so that's the type of value I think we have to keep our eye on as we figure out what are we putting back into the river.
Thank you.
Brief questions, please.
Hi, Walter.
Yeah, I'll be brief for answers, too, but I take the hint.
Thanks for your time. My name's George. I work as an analyst at the local bank. So I'm curious at your thought on financial services industry, particularly the trend that graduates from top MBA programs are choosing the Silicon Valley over Wall Street. It's a fairly recent trend.
Well,
so
I'm going to say something you probably don't love, which is I think the misallocation of IQ points into the financial industry was not a great thing. That for decades, the smartest people, the guy who ran Intel told me the great thing about the financial crash was for the first time I could go to Yale or Harvard or Toronto or wherever and get math majors who might actually want to join Intel instead of creating an algorithm for a hedge fund or something or working for banks.
Right.
I think that obviously the financial industry does a good thing, but the question is, where should we be allocating our IQ points? Secondly, I think that the financial industry should be headed for, and I hope you'll be in the vanguard of, a major disruption, meaning Bitcoins and other types of things should allow us to take more control over our transactions than have them be as kludgy as they are for the average citizen who wants to send money, make a small purchase online, or whatever it may be. So I would hope that as people go into the financial industry, they would say, let me do this. I mean, sometimes I'll find somebody who's a great math whiz coming out of college and say, oh, I'm going to go work for, I won't name, a hedge fund. So what are you going to do? Oh, I've got an algorithm that'll shave a millisecond off of a nanosecond off of this, that, and the other. I say, why are you doing that? So, oh, because we can make money if we... I said, yeah, but why are you doing it? He says, oh, because you can, by the spread, make a profit and you can really... I said, yeah, but why are you doing it? And I think, people in any industry, whether it's going into the pharmaceuticals or Intel or financial, say, okay, why am I doing it? And there are ways I think we can make through, easing the friction on transactions, micro-lending, everything else, make the world better for everybody. Or we can apply our mathematical genius to, a type of algorithm that might make money for a hedge fund but not serve the world as much. But I know I'm unpopular saying that, especially probably amongst the people you work for.
Yes.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Your name?
Well, I hope it wasn't insulting, was it?
No,
Okay.
not at all.
Thank you.
Your name,
yes,
please.
finally.
Say a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Sorry. My name is Amin, and I'm, for the purposes of my question, a mechanical engineer with an MBA who's worked in oil and gas, aerospace, data analytics, and now hoping to bridge into renewable energy. The fact that I'm a woman is incidental to all of those qualifications. So my question to you kind of spurs from the earlier comments made where women should be the first people to speak or the first to interrupt. The fact that I'm a woman is only ever pointed out to me by the other 50% of the population and not myself. The only time I've been cognizant that I'm the only woman in a room full of guys is, in fact, when a guy has mentioned it to me. Until that moment, I am in a room full of my peers. So my question to you is, what do we do to educate the other 50% of the people about how their conduct impacts the uncomfortable situation or segregates my accomplishments from everybody else's just by virtue of the fact that I happen to be a woman?
Yeah, I'll answer that, but first let me praise what you've been doing in terms of technology, which we often talk about as information technology. But technology in the energy sphere, whether it's unconventional sources of gas or whether it's renewable sources of energy, that's a technology field I should have given a shout out to, along with healthcare technology as being a wave of the future and being more difficult to do than the Facebook in the dorm room. I mean, maybe you can do it, but it tends to take, fracking takes thousands of innovations done, over a course of time. I don't, and I said all that because I'm not sure I know the answer to your question. There's a bit of a tension, which is I would like men to not be less cognizant of the role of women, but more cognizant in a way. I would like any man who works at a company in which 90%, are men, to at least ask a question of, are they creating an environment that is not as inclusive? I feel even as strongly about people, you know, from different backgrounds, people from poorer backgrounds, that this whole technology and innovation space leaves out a lot of the population. So even though I would like maybe to say to men, just ignore the fact of who's a woman and who's a man in the room, there's also a part of me that says, if there's only one woman around the table, is there anything you've done to make an atmosphere in which there aren't more women, more people of color, more people from poor backgrounds, more whatever around the table? So even though it's uncomfortable, I don't mind people being cognizant of diversity issues.
I'm going to double down on this side.
All right.
And go to this
And I'm
next
really
speaker.
promise to make shorter answers. I'm
Right.
sorry.
I was going to say, this is the women's mic.
I should just want to say there's
We're keeping it.
there's less than 10 minutes left.
Too short.
So we have to have brief questions, and I really want to take questions from everybody who's taken the opportunity to stand. So please be brief, and let's try and get through everyone.
Heather Crosby, I'm a mentor to entrepreneurs at Venture Lab, which is like Mars, but north of Toronto, another innovation center. There are two nonprofit organizations, one in the US and Canada, that do work with girls and women to learn how to code. One in the US called Girls Who Code, and one in Canada called Ladies Learning Code. So just when you are talking to this, there is certainly a number of initiatives that are going forward in trying to ensure more women move into computer science. My question, I had many questions, but I only get one, and they were all about prognosticating, talking about the implications going forward of everything you've experienced and learned and the interactions you've had with great minds. So my only question is there anyone or any publications that you would recommend to a non-technical, non-engineering person that I could follow, that you follow, that would incite thinking and questioning and knowledge for me going forward? There are so many issues related to the internet and for example.
I must say, I surf all over the place on the web. I read the conventional newspapers, but you know, there's 100 places I'll go online for the latest in both technology and the moral issues surrounding our technology. So I don't have sort of a great reading list, but I do read history a lot. I think that matters as well.
Thank you.
My name is Jimo Viagale. I'm a software engineer at Nascent Digital and co-founder of Ross. We're building an artificially intelligent research solution powered by IBM's Watson. My question is, Leonardo da Vinci was working on flight in the 15th century, trying to imitate something that was unique to birds. And it wasn't achieved till the 20th century with the Wright brothers. Don't you think, since intelligence is more complicated than flight, that we're being a little impatient with it?
Yeah, I think it's possible in 500 years, to go back to Leonardo, that we will have a machine that truly passes the Turing test. But you work with Watson, and when you get to the end of the book, Watson is one of the stars. And Jenny Ramati, who's the CEO of IBM, says, the more we work with Watson and the more we work with Deep Blue, the chess-playing machine, the more we realize that combining Watson with doctors, for example, as opposed to trying to get Watson to diagnose cancer alone, or combining Deep Blue with people who played chess, that you could combine a computer chess program with an amateur chess player, and the combination of a human computer would beat any grandmaster or Deep Blue. So she said that she learned that the era of cognitive computing, which is what Watson is all about, will advance much more rapidly to the extent we pair the two. It is possible you'll get to artificial intelligence that does not require any humans, as you put it, in 500 years. I don't know why that should be a goal. I don't know that that would get us further than the continued combination of the two. J.C.R. Licklider, who's one of the heroes of the book, was asked that question in the 50s by all the people who then said artificial intelligence will just be 20, 30 years away. And he said, maybe so. Maybe it'll come in 20 years, maybe in 200 years, maybe in 2 millennium. But in the meantime, why don't we combine the power of human creativity and the processing power of machines and do the awesome things we can do with that approach? So to me, that's the way of happening. And you should remember that as great as Leonardo was, when we did flying machines, they weren't flapping the wings, replicating a bird. It was something totally different. So maybe our machines shouldn't replicate animals. Maybe we should have them do different things.
Your name, please.
My name is Hélène Julian, and I'm the founder of a a startup that's preparing to launch called EnviroCommons. And it's an online interactive national platform for creating collective power for us to work together to create change in the areas of climate change, sustainability, and environment issues. And I built this by myself. So I'm a programmer for years. And it took me 6 years. And so, you know, I don't want to discourage anybody from doing what I did, you know, because sometimes you do have to do it by yourself. I couldn't find anybody who had, you know, sort of mindset that I had. And, but now I'm at the stage where I have advisors. I've got a guy who's an investor, who was for many years a senior
we only have another minute
senior
or two,
companies.
so maybe
Can I ask what your question might be?
Okay.
Because we only have 4 minutes on the clock.
Oh, okay, sorry. Have you invested in any of the companies that you had like connections with, like Apple? You were there at the start of like a lot of stuff going on. You never invested?
Generally invest in companies that I would write about. I feel that that would be a conflict, and all of my investments are in the S&P 500, which is really boring.
Yeah.
Sorry.
2 more questions. Yes.
So I'll skip the intro. My name is Sandeep. Quick questions, sort of contrarian. So what's your point of view on this whole fetishization of the startup culture, right? So pretty much everyone today talks about
I'm sorry, the what-ification?
Sort of the whole fetish around the startup culture, which has become this cool and hip thing.
Yeah.
I think Paul Graham from Y Combinator called it the makeup startup culture. So because there is obviously a lot of people are going to get burned, and maybe it's not. So there's this whole
Is there too much focus on startups? That's
and lack of appreciation of doing it.
Yeah, I think there may be a little bit too much focus on startups, because one of the most important things is to figure out what works and bring it to scale. And so I do think that the bring it to scale culture is something that we should work on more. But I don't want to discourage any startups, because they're pretty cool. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Laura Mitchell.
I'm sorry about the short answers, but I'm trying to get everybody
that's okay.
in.
Appreciate that. Thanks.
I have a short one as well. My name is Laura Mitchell. My husband and I are working on a startup, and it's a diversity game. That's all I can tell you. So here's my question, short and sweet. Everybody keeps talking constantly. We hear it in the States, we hear it in Canada, all over Europe, et cetera, that there should be changes to the educational system to get us on this track toward entrepreneurial work. So what changes should be happening? Because we, as recently graduated or even a long time ago graduated students, know that, but they're not happening. So what do you advocate?
Well, I think that the K through 12, the kindergarten through 12th grade education system in Canada and the United States used to be the best in the world. Now in the United States, it's about 18th, which is really bad. Secondly, I think we in the United States, more than Canada, have a 2-tiered education system, which is if you're from a privileged family, you get a good education, not if you're not. So I think that's particularly bad. I think that we need to continue to encourage questioning of authority, curiosity, creativity. That has been the secret sauce, as I said, since the birth of the United States. And I do think we do an okay job with that in our, and then at the university level, I think more collaborative and cross-platform. So the biologist is working with the data miner, and instead of saying there's a biology department and a computer science department, they're in different buildings.
30 seconds for your question.
We can go a minute long. I'll be all right.
I'm curious about you, Walter, because I'm a huge fan, and you're by far my favorite author. I'm curious about what do you do personally to stay creative, and what are some of your most memorable books that you've read?
Yeah, I mean, I have failed a lot, and I'm okay with failure. I was not particularly good at running CNN, as you may have noticed. I don't think you put that in my resume even, so maybe I've whitewashed it out. But I try to say, all right, I'm the luckiest camper around. You know, I live in a great time, in a great place, and I don't try to have a chip on my shoulder and try to protect everything. I try to say, all right, let me take a risk. I mean, even in a small way, this book was a bit of a risk, which was I could have done another conventional biography, and it would have been, you know, huge. But doing a collaborative thing was a way to say, let me try something different. So I try to keep moving. That helps.
Last question.
Really short and sweet question. It's actually the question from Peter's side. What's the one thing that you believe in that most people don't?
One thing I believe in that most people don't, Peter Thiel asked that question. I strongly believe, and most people don't, but not all, I strongly believe that throughout human history, our moral capabilities have kept up with our technology, with a few bad mistakes, like the atom bomb. We dropped it before we processed it morally. I believe that all the data points show that technology doesn't put people out of work. It opens more opportunities. I believe that technology doesn't get out of our control, and that's why we need the humanities, so that we're able to process and understand and put in historic context and moral context this notion of what our technology can and should do. Because it doesn't control us, we control it. So when people talk about that this technology might put people out of work, or it's causing, offshoring, or robotics is bad for the car industry or whatever. I say, no, as humans, we've always been able to process and handle our technology, and we will be able to do that in the future as long as we feel comfortable with our technology and don't fear it, as long as we know where it came from, which is why I write books like this, and as long as we're able to ask the moral questions that arise on everything from privacy to genetic engineering that arise every time we have a march of technology. And so I think that the fear and the pessimism and the almost Ludditism against new technologies that happens almost every time a new technology comes along, I'm always on the Pollyannish optimistic side, but I think I got history on my side, if not most of the people. Thank you, Earl.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, everyone in the audience, and particularly to the questioners who helped us continue this conversation. I think you'd all agree that this was a very rich and interesting discussion tonight, and I want you once again to join me in thanking Walter Isaacson.
Thank you, Earl.